Anne was in the kitchen preparing dinner, while her son Frank sat in the living room, watching television from his wheelchair. Suddenly, a faint sound broke the quiet evening, the cry of a baby coming from just outside their front door. Frank turned his head, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Mom, I hear a baby," he called out. Anne froze for a moment, her heart racing, before she hurried toward the door. When Anne opened the door, she was not prepared for what she would see. There, lying inside a small shoebox, was a newborn baby, wrapped in old cloths, tiny hands trembling in the evening air. Her heart raced. For a moment, fear and shock froze her in place. But then, her mother's instinct spoke louder. She bent down, lifted the fragile child into her arms, and brought him inside. Anne cared for the baby with trembling hands. She held him close, whispered words of comfort, and waited anxiously for Walton to return home from work. She knew this moment would change everything. Walton, Anne's husband, arrived home tired, covered in grease, and set down his tools. When Walton finally walked through the door, Anne's eyes were already filled with tears. She showed him the baby, her voice shaking as she explained what had happened. She told him about the shoebox, the knock on the door, the desperate woman who had disappeared into the night. Anne looked at Walton with hope, and then, with all the courage of her heart, Anne pleaded, "Walton, let us keep this child. He was left at our door for a reason. Maybe he is meant to be ours." Walton sat, tired from work, gazing at the baby in Anne's arms. The living room was simple, lit by the faint glow of a single lamp. Anne held the baby close, her eyes filled with tears as she turned to Walton. "This child, he is a gift from God," she whispered with trembling conviction. "We were chosen to open this door. We must care for him, love him, and make him part of our family." Walton lowered his head and took a deep breath, the weight of a hard life reflected on his face. Then he looked at the baby and at Anne, feeling the power of her words. Walton remained silent for a moment. He knew their struggles, he knew their poverty, and yet he also knew the truth in Anne's heart. That night a decision was made, one that would forever change the course of their lives. The bedroom door slowly opened. Frank in his wheelchair appeared, curious, staring at Anne's arms. Suddenly a small voice came from the hallway. It was Frank, their 6-year-old son, watching from his wheelchair. His eyes, wide and full of wonder, rested on the tiny baby in Anne's arms. Frank slowly approaches with the chair, stretching out his hands. "Is that my little brother?" he asked softly. Anne and Walton exchanged a glance, their hearts breaking and healing all at once. In that moment, the answer became clear. Frank touches the baby's little hand and smiles for the first time in a long time. Frank's fragile hand reached out, and the baby's tiny fingers wrapped around it. A bond was born in that instant, a connection of pure innocence, stronger than fear, stronger than hardship. The child who had been abandoned was no longer alone. He had found a brother in a family. That evening, the family gathered together. Anne looked at Walton, then at Frank, and finally at the baby who had been placed in their arms by fate. "He needs a name," Anne whispered. They chose to call him David, a name that carried strength, hope, and the promise of a new beginning. Anne caresses the baby. Frank smiles with emotion. Walton watches silently, but with tears in his eyes. From that day on, David was no longer an abandoned child. He was their son, their brother, their blessing. Despite the poverty, despite the endless struggles, they raised him with love, with warmth, and with all the strength their hearts could give. Walton worked long, exhausting hours at the mechanic shop. His hands grew rough, his back ached, but his purpose was clear: to provide for Anne, for Frank, and now for little David. Every coin he earned was stretched for food, for rent, for Frank's medical treatments, and for the growing needs of their new son. Frank, more than anyone else, was filled with joy. Though his body was weak, his heart grew stronger every time David smiled at him. Their bond was unshakable, a love that needed no words. Frank taught David patience, kindness, and resilience. And David gave Frank a reason to laugh, a reason to dream, a reason to fight. The years began to pass, and little David grew strong. Every step he took, every word he spoke, echoed like a victory inside that humble home. He was more than just a child. He was a reminder that even in hardship, life could bloom. Frank, now about 10 years old in a wheelchair, teaching David, now 4 years old, to draw on a simple sheet of paper. Frank and David became inseparable. Though Frank's legs could not carry him, his spirit carried his little brother further than anyone could imagine. He showed David how to read, how to dream, how to never give up. And in return, David gave Frank laughter, joy, and the feeling that he was never alone. Life was never easy. Walton worked until his body ached, and Ann stretched every coin to feed the family and keep the home alive. But every sacrifice was worth it, because in their hearts, love was greater than hunger, and hope was stronger than fear. Even as a young boy, David showed a spark unlike any other. He was curious, observant, and remarkably clever. While other children played outside, David's eyes were glued to computers and gadgets, fascinated by the world of technology that seemed to open endless possibilities. David's passion for technology became a light in their humble home. Even with the weight of Frank's illness and the struggles of daily life, his curiosity reminded the family that hope could be found in learning, in discovery, and in dreaming big. As David grew, his talent for computers and technology did not go unnoticed. He began helping where he could, solving small problems, finding clever ways to make life easier for Frank, Ann, and Walton. In a home full of hardship, David's brilliance became a beacon of hope, showing that even in the darkest times, ingenuity and determination could shine through. Time passed quickly, and Frank grew into a young man of 25. Yet the disease that had bound him to the wheelchair since childhood never loosened its grip. He had the heart of a fighter, but his body still carried the same heavy chains. Walton, now older and weary, carried the burden of years of labor. For decades, he had worked until his hands were calloused and his back bent, all for one dream, to see Frank walk. But the cure had never come. And with every year that passed, frustration and sorrow carved deeper lines into his face. Then one day, a glimmer of hope appeared. Doctors spoke of a possible surgery, a chance, fragile but real, to free Frank from his prison of pain. The hospital was far away, in another city. The procedure was expensive, far beyond the family's reach. But it was the first time in years that hope had a name. What they didn't know is that the baby, abandoned on their doorstep, would be sent by God to save their beloved brother. By the age of 20, David had grown into a true genius in computer science. Driven by his love for his brother Frank, he created software designed to make life easier for people confined to wheelchairs. Every feature was built with care, every function inspired by his own family's struggles and the desire to make a difference. David presented his project to his professor at the university, where he was part of a program for students of extraordinary ability. The professor examined the software carefully, testing its features, and was blown away by the efficiency, the precision, and the impact it promised. Impressed beyond measure, the professor took David's project to a leading pharmaceutical company. The company immediately recognized the potential of his creation and wanted to acquire the software. What had begun as a young boy's attempt to help his brother had now become a breakthrough capable of transforming the lives of countless people. With the success of his software, David's life had changed, but his heart was always with his family, especially with Frank. He saw the struggle his brother had endured all his life, and he knew it was time to act. Using the funds and recognition from his breakthrough, David proposed an idea. "Father, Mother, we can finally afford the surgery that could give Frank the chance to walk. This is our chance to repay the years of your sacrifices and my brother's courage." Hope filled the home for the first time in decades. Walton, who had labored for years without finding a solution, felt a mix of relief and disbelief. Anne held Frank's hand, whispering words of encouragement, while David coordinated every detail of the journey to the distant hospital. Finally, after years of struggle, They were on their way to a chance at a new life. In that moment, they realized something profound. The years of hardship, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, none of it had been in vain. Through love, perseverance, and the brilliance of a young boy who refused to give up, their family was rising, stronger, united, and ready to face whatever came next. After years of struggle, hope finally became reality. The surgery was a success, and Frank felt strength in his legs for the first time in decades. Tears of joy and gratitude filled their humble home as they realized that every sacrifice, every sleepless night, and every moment of doubt had led to this miracle. David's brilliance had not only changed the world for countless people in wheelchairs, but it had also changed his own family forever. Through love, perseverance, and faith, they had risen above every challenge. The family that once struggled to survive had discovered the true meaning of hope, courage, and unity. Family is not just about blood. It's about love, sacrifice, and the courage to face the impossible together. No matter the obstacles, no matter the hardship, families can rise, stronger, braver, and full of hope. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Family Rising for more inspiring stories of hope, courage, and family. Your support helps us bring more stories that touch hearts and change lives.